Bon dia. Benvinguts en aquesta sessió del programa Sitges Cocoon. Bienvenidos a esta sesión de programa Sitges Cocoon. Para aquellos que no conozcáis el programa, está dedicado a todo lo que es explorar nuevas herramientas, innovación, tecnología cerca del audiovisual. Buscamos todas estas propuestas que llevan un poco más allá la industria cinematográfica, la industria del consumo audiovisual, y por ello hemos organizado un programa que lo encontráis en una web específica, incluso Sitges Cocoon, en el cual no solamente recomendamos algunos de los documentales que se pasan en Sitges, sino todas estas actividades como la que os presentamos hoy, que realmente demuestran hasta qué punto podemos adecuar nuestra producción audiovisual o podemos mejorarla o podemos reconducir las historias que contamos basándonos a veces en el famoso algoritmo, aunque siempre con un tratamiento humano. Yo no avanzo más porque si no sí que sería un spoiler, y Nils tiene la respuesta a una pregunta tan interesante como ¿qué es lo que nos asusta a los europeos? E incluso a los españoles. Pero antes también quería dar las gracias a Alex, que representa el programa Europa Creativa Media, por darnos apoyo en esta iniciativa, y por supuesto a nuestro socio de viaje, que es la Universitat Oberta de Cataluña, a través de Toni, con el que iniciamos con esta especie de trabajo en red, esta exploración fantástica y maravillosa de innovación y cine, que espero que os resulte de interés. Muchísimas gracias.
El programa Media lleva 30 años en el mercado, celebramos este aniversario, y apoya iniciativas desde la formación a la exhibición. Sitges es parada obligatoria y Cocoon es el lugar donde Media apuesta las líneas de nueva tecnología, donde Nils, os lo va a contar en 5 minutos, ha sacado el proyecto Publicum con varios partners, originalmente de Dinamarca. El aspecto que nos ha interesado mucho al Festival de Cine de Sitges, y cuando le propuse en Cannes a Mónica traer Publicum y a Nils aquí, de la mano de la WOC, fue el aspecto antropológico. No es simplemente meter metadata en una caja shaky, sino que hay mucho más detrás, y es muy interesante en un festival como es de fantástico terror en el sentido más amplio ver qué es lo que más tememos y de dónde viene. Así que os dejo con Nils y con Toni. La sesión va a ser en inglés. Si tenéis alguna dificultad, tenemos a Mike, buen amigo, que en caso de emergencia facilitará el Q&A al final. Gracias y disfrutad.
I'm really excited, and even I'm a little bit emotional because I am an academic and I'm a fan of the Sitges Film Festival for years. And to be here to talk about innovation, to talk about what is for me in some way research too, because it's groundbreaking, and what Nils do is really groundbreaking. For me it's wonderful. I've been working on new media, researching on media for years, and from this ethnographic side, and lately combining a little bit with data with the ethnographic, and this is what we are going to talk about today. So for us it's great, and it's of course it's awesome to have the chance to be in this partnership with the Sitges Film Festival. And we have been working hard with a master in fantastic filmmaking and television and fiction. And now we are collaborating in this, through this Cocoon. We have a great activity, sorry, I have to do that. This afternoon from 5 to 7, we'll be playing with creating stories here in this very room. This sort of fairy tales technology, co-creation, blockchain, with some people from New York, some people here in Sitges, and it will be great. So catch up with this also, because it will be fantastic. And okay, I would like to present you Nils Albert. He's a sociologist. And I was asking him, how do you want me to present you? And he said something that is very interesting for me, because he says he works with social data and also with human data. And I think it's a very perfect summary of what he does. He is the CEO of a company called Will & Agency, And as you know, he now is working with this tool, this method, this service called Publicum, which has been funded by the media program, which marks the interest of this action for filmmaking and the future of filmmaking. I leave you with Niels, and afterwards I have lots of questions, but the most important thing is that you have the time to ask questions, so I hope we have a lively debate, and okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for showing up. I'm gonna walk a little bit around here. Yes, I am representing a Danish company called Wilden Agency, and we work with social data science, which is a discipline combining small data and big data, basically, put into the same research set. So we work with a combination of AI and anthropology, not only in the film industry, but also in the film industry. We've been working with this for years. But in the film industry, which I'm going to talk about today, we've been working with this for a few years on this service called Publicum, which is a tailor-made version of AI and anthropology put together specifically to help filmmakers. And you can think about this a little bit like a collaboration between R2-D2 and Indiana Jones. And I know he's an archaeologist and not an anthropologist, but that's a subfield within anthropology. So I put that up also because there are no minifigs of anthropologists. But basically the combination here is a computer helping a man to understand something that can create some creative value in the end. We have intentionally designed the solution for the film industry like this, where the computer is somebody helping the man, so it's enhancing the anthropology and not the other way around. In other of the industries that we work with, we have a computer to design or decide even more, but we think that has a very bad fit to how we want to work with film. Films are made of humans, and they should continue to have the opportunity to evolve. So Indiana Jones is leading here. We decided to create this a few years ago when we were contacted by a Danish production company. And this is a stock photo, but it could have been a real photo from their situation. They were 2 days before filming, and they asked us to come up with some ideas for launching the film. And we received the script, and to be honest, I didn't really understand anything of the film. I didn't understand who they were trying to target. I even had a hard time to decide which genre this was within. And the curious thing wasn't that I didn't understand it, but the thing was that the film production company even had a hard time to understand themselves who they think this would be for. And this is very different from all the other companies and clients and industries that we work with, because as I said, we work with many other industries than the film industry, and the first thing you would normally do is to understand where is the market, why are people interested in, what have people interested in terms of what I'm doing. And then you want to create a product, or in this case, a movie. So that was a big surprise to us that 2 days before the first day of shooting, they really didn't know who were going to see this movie. So after we contacted the Danish film industry, because we quickly learned that this wasn't a unique case, this was very common, that you have a lot of energy, a lot of thought put into a long process of years and years, creating this great story that you're now about to film, and you're really not sure who you want to show this film to. So we suggested the Danish Film Institute that we conducted a research program together, where we would look at, this time, not the audience, but the professionals, to understand or to get onto the inside of how movies are created and how maybe we could, in a better way, place a message about what the audience were interested in a way that wasn't disturbing for the creative freedom. So over half a year, we worked together with the Danish film industry and the Danish Film Institute, interviewing writers, directors, producers, distributors, to understand a little bit how they worked and how they were motivated to work more with audience insights in the beginning, and not only at launch, but also in the beginning of writing a story. And could we change that into something they found creatively inspiring? So a few things we learned from there that has shaped what Publicum is today. One was that we were using the wrong words as consultants. So talking about audience involvement is a wrong word. It has a big piss-off effect, I think you could say that, because I think that was another image going on in the head of the creative when we use that word, which was more or less outsourcing the story to crowd writing with tens of thousands of people involved. And that's, of course, not the intention with any creative development, also not outside of the film industry. So we changed that a little bit to make sure that it's not being, that what we come with from the audience is not something that dominates the creative, but it's something that elevates it a little bit more. And that's, again, allowing Indiana Jones to have more power than the computer. So that's a very important thing also for how we designed the solution. Then there was a myth-busting inside, I think, about that we've heard for a long time, also from the Danish Institute, that film creators are not really curious about the audience. They don't care. They just want to write their own stories and do their own art. And I don't think that's right. That's not what we saw having conducted all these interviews. We saw that people were actually really curious about it, but they just thought the tools for bringing these insights into a creative process were really, really bad. It was more or less designing. It was more or less data for distribution and so on, and for most creative that is not really interesting. That's at least not what our research saw. So yes, give us some insights, but please come in another shape of a tool. Then another thing that was really important for designing the right tool, this is not the case here. So we intentionally make sure that we are not coming with any hard conclusions every time we deliver a project, but we come with something that can then start new reflections. Because this is an industry where you talk and you think a lot for many years, and we don't think that we can just come in after 6 weeks and then deliver something that is really clear. So we try to help dialogues and conversations become larger than when we enter, but without a conclusion. So there's a lot of data already, of course, in the film industry, but we also found that when we did all the interviews that a lot of the people thought, the fit is not very good. Also, there are a lot of AI in there, but it felt a little bit too American to many of those we talked to. It's not like the way we work with it in Europe, where the auteur culture is really dominating and it has to be there for a while. But if a computer comes to tell you what to do or to reproduce a pattern of something that was great yesterday, that's not really a turn on, to be honest. That's not what we saw. So we softened the edges a little bit of our AI and we combined it with the anthropology to make sure this is not just something that tells you a clear direction, but it's something that makes a creative space even bigger. But still with also adding some precision, because that is, of course, still the problem, that maybe the gut feeling dominates a little bit too long. So we need to find this good balance between having freedom, but having a little bit more precision. And that's what we have trying to do here with Publicum. So basically, it's a 3-step model that works with, they always start with the intention of the creatives. We have a word for this, we call it treatment emotion connection. Maybe that's not a completely right word, because we are sometimes working in the treatment stage, but we also often work in the first step of the first draft of a script, which is not the normal place for us to enter. What we will then do is we will receive the script from the director and the writer. We will read it through as anthropologists and sociologists, and we will then come with our take on what we think some of the key central themes in this script is that people can really identify to. Because we know this is a strong generator of also having people going into the cinema later on. We have very good discussion and we're not deciding on anything. So this is a collaboration we do together with the creatives as well. So there might be themes we think is really super interesting in terms of creating identification or provocation or whatever. But if the creative are not agreeing onto that, we will find other themes. So together we decide on what are we really super interested in here together, and what can we then start moving into next stage with. And that's what's happening in the next stage, where we use our AI part, and I have a few examples of that later. But basically we're trying to listen to what people actually talk about and feel for whenever we have a certain theme we have agreed upon. That leads to some kind of insights that I will show you in a second. And in the last state, we then interview people. This is the anthropology part. We interview people on a phone-based anthropology version. We have made an app, so we can reach people in different countries, and they have the opportunity to film themselves over a week, where they share their thoughts on the central themes and elements, visual stories, scenes, characters, and so on in the movie. So, an example here. I came here today in Sitges because I also wanted to talk a little bit about what people are really scared about in Spain. And as an example, I actually tried to talk to our R2D2 computer about that to show you how that works. What we do first is we have a data provider. And this is not script data. This is data from current conversations, what people are talking about today, and not 20 years patterns of successful scripts. That's not the data we use for our AI. We use social media data, news media data, blog data, and forum data. In this case, I put in the word. Sorry, I'm not really Spanish. Asusta, is that the right word? Thank you. Yeah. Scared in English, yeah. And it generates how much? 1.848 million hits. And I can then I can select from where. So all of this is taken from Spain. I can also go in, and if I want to be really specific, I can go to the Catalonia region, and I can actually also go to Sitges. Of course, the data pool will be smaller and smaller, but I can sort it down to where it has been posted from. What we then will get is a huge set of data that we will then feed to our algorithm. And basically what R2D2 do for us here is read through all these hundreds of thousands of documents that will take us more years and years to come through on our own. And what it does, it's producing a network like you can see here on the screen right now, where we can see how the different keywords in the documents are connected. So once a word is used again and again and again together with other words, the computer identifies some clusters for us and say this is what people are talking about when they're talking about being scared in Spain. And that's a huge help. But what it doesn't do, it's explaining us why. That's what we have to do. That's when the human part comes in, but it leads us down to the main sources behind the documents, and then we can start reading and understand what is then the sentiment within these documents. So that's a lot of hours spent here also with my colleagues, working together with the machine, and eventually coming up with this, which is the 5 different clusters of what scares you guys here in Spain the most. I'm going to come into the insights a little bit later, and I've also actually compared to another country that makes a lot of movies, America. So we have actually done 2 clusters here. So we have the Spanish clusters to identify 5 things that makes people in Spain scared, and we compared it to a country that produces quite a few movies as well. And I'm going to come back to the results in a second. But what's happening then in the next step is, as I said, then we're going to move into the anthropology. So all these insights, we have now shared that with the creative team, and some of it is really interesting for them. Some of it might be, okay enough. I don't need to dig further into that. But we then have this app where we interview people in depth about what we have seen here, and ask us questions about what they scare, what they are afraid of, and so on. Normally we have 6 days with this, and we have themes, we have scenes, we have characters, we have visuals, we have pictures, and then of course whatever the creative find is interesting. For us it's really important to maintain that, to make sure that the creative people have the control over this every time we do a project. Then we will, that's a little too fast. Then we will recruit people that we make sure are within a diverse group, but still a group that has been to cinemas watching this type of movies. So it's not just anyone, and it's not film critics, it's normal people that we make sure go into cinema once in a while. As you can see in this case, which is a Dutch case, we also compared different countries. So in this case, it's Denmark, the Netherlands, and the US actually for a case here. And these people participate over a week, and they generate videos like this, 400 replies. For each question, they have 3 to 5 minutes to film themselves and to reply to themselves. And normally, as an anthropologist, you will travel around to many different homes in different countries, and that will take forever, and it will be really expensive. And as you know, the budget in the early stages of filming is not endless, so we cannot do it like that, and we can maybe not use the planet for just traveling around so much. So we can get a lot of data on board without ever leaving our office in Copenhagen. Once all of these are in, we have a platform here, as you can see to the left, where we will start conducting a pattern analysis or pattern recognition of what people are saying. So every video is being tagged. We are noting down what people are talking about, and then in the end we conduct an analysis where the two parts come together, the AI part and the anthropology part, and we deliver a report in the early stage to our projects that have these reflections but not hard conclusions. The typical project that we work with is something that starts, launch, or repeated. Starting project, which the primarily focus is when you have a new project and you are about at the stage of a treatment or first stage of a script. We also do help with marketing still, but we do that at a very early stage to identify are there something people talk about right now that are really interesting to tap into as well. And then we also do series and sequels, looking at what did people think about the last one compared to what can we do in the next episode or the next season or the next sequel. We've been working a year with this in Denmark, Norway, and the Netherlands. As you said, we are supported by media as well, and we've been working with a wide range of genres, all the way from high school romances to horror and science documentaries. So a lot of different genre has been come through. And just a few examples of a snack version of some of the stuff that we found. This one is an example from Denmark. It's a periodical drama where the main character is an outsider, and the director in this case was really curious about what people saw an outsider be. What do you have to do? Which actions do you have to take as a human to be considered an outsider? And one of the interesting things we found here from our AI part is that love was actually a thing that people talked a lot about, which was a little bit of a surprise to us, because love is of course relational and an outsider is normally something we perceive as an isolated person. So we thought that was interesting why there were so many documents that talked about love, until we started reading a bit more into it and understanding, this is love outside of the norm. So this is me, 45. If I was too curious about a girl at 16, a lot of people would probably think, this is weird, and that could make me an outsider, for instance. And once you start thinking about it in that context, it suddenly makes a lot of sense and it's very intuitive. And in this case, it was quite interesting because you had a movie here with many different layers where love was as a part of the story, but it wasn't really a high prioritize for the director. And in this case, it was a crime element really dominating the story, and there were other elements, also a portrait of Copenhagen in the late 1800s and so on, and then, by the way, also a love story. But once we discovered this, that it was so connected to love, the main character as an outsider, the director chose actually to shift the story balance complete and make it a love story that also had a crime element. So suddenly a very different movie. Not, of course, discarding the script, but making a lot of adjustments and also thinking about this very differently in terms of positioning it. Then another example is from Norway. This is a body horror, so this is a little bit related to the theme here at Sitges. A movie where the main character is a strong narcissist, and a narcissist that to an insane level does something to herself that is a drama in this film. But the director in this case wanted to know, what do we actually talk about and think about when we think about narcissists in Scandinavia? So we compared that in the 3 different Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, and we have these 3 clusters, or map of emotions, as you can call them. And as you can see, just by looking at it, it's very different. And then we started looking into all the documents, and by the way, it's in Scandinavian language, all the examples, so you're not able to understand it. But we always serve some of this and present snippets of this to the creative, so they can also get a feeling of the words being used and the attitude and atmosphere within the actual copy. But basically, in all these 3 countries, a narcissist is seen as a bastard, but a very different kind of bastard, 3 different kinds of bastards, actually. So in Denmark, it's a very dangerous bastard. It's someone you shouldn't be falling in love with. It's somebody who you don't want to be friends with. He's just mean, basically. Where in Sweden, it's very different. then it's a poor bastard, which to me as a Dane is a little bit fun, because we always make a little bit fun about Sweden being so soft. But it's somebody who has been falling out of society. And we have a responsibility, everybody, to bring him back, because it's actually an illness, and it's not fun, but it's actually poor for this bastard. And in Norway, they have a very, very cynical way to think about this, because it's actually quite useful to have narcissists in Norway, because, yeah, we don't really like them, but they can do all the stuff we don't want to do ourselves. They can run the country and the big organizations and basically just be the assholes that the country need, but we don't want to be ourselves. So a totally different approach to this. And in the case here, the director can then choose, okay, what will I want to do? And again, we're not giving any conclusions to what to do, because we don't want to be the creative experts. We just want to open their eyes to what is the emotional landscape of the audience. So in this case, the director, for instance, he can say, okay, I might actually work with my character in the Swedish way, because that's very surprising. Maybe it's even provocative. Or I want to have people to identify a little bit more, so I'm going to adjust it a little bit more towards what we think about in Norway. Up to him. This last example is from the Netherlands, where you had a political sensitive topic. This is actually it's American. It's a Dutch production, but it's taking place in America. It's about nuclear testing on American soil in the late 50s, where a lot of young men were exposed to nuclear radiation. And we had this very nice question from the film team that we're afraid of, once this hit the cinema, we might alienate one group or the other in terms of a political spectrum. Is it like a left-wingers movie, or is it a right-winger movie? If it just feels a little bit of one of those, you might risk that nobody comes to the cinema. So what they asked us is, can you listen to what people talk about when they talk about nuclear weapons, and can you find some areas where they do not disagree? And we could. So these are the two different sources of data we pooled together. In this case, we did it a little bit differently. Everything is from Twitter in this case, and we were able to identify, based on how people fill out their bios in Twitter, combined with finding people from states we knew were really left or right wings, we were able to make two different data sources, a left wing and a right wing. And we listened to the different conversations, and we found then 6 different areas where people actually did agree. And I'm not going through all of them because it's going to take too long. But they come from different perspectives, but somehow they actually come to the same conclusion, which is very interesting in terms of developing the story, the characters, and also, of course, positioning the movie once it hits cinema. One example here is that actually nobody really wanted denuclearization, which I think was a surprise, because you could probably think that the left-wingers wanted to get rid of these big bombs. But for another reason than the right-wingers, they agreed this is an American necessity. For the right-wingers, it was, of course, we're the biggest policeman and we need the biggest gun, to put it very simple. And for the left-wingers, it was more like, this is actually keeping the peace, because it's devastating if everybody do something. But there's a deadlock position, there's actually a lot of peace potential within. So final conclusion, it's the same. So this was then used. This is a quite interesting thing to talk about once you go to the cinemas and when you launch a movie, but it's also very interesting to think about when you create the main character. In this case, for instance, the state was represented by a military person, which is not unproblematic in terms of the right-wingers, for instance. So there was a lot of discussion about how to balance this in the right way. All right, so that was the last example I brought from the movies. So just let's go back to the scary stuff in Spain thing. I need to come a little closer here. So 5 things we saw here about being afraid of something in Spain. The first one is actually talking about the world a lot, that the world is very dangerous. That's a lot is going on right now that we don't really like, and it's coming to Spain. So Spain is a little bit pure, but the rest of the world is polluted, and it's going to change things in Spain in a not very nice way. Then There was a lot about other people's bodies, which I thought was quite interesting. A lot of it has to do with the pandemic, so we keep a distance, but there was a lot of reflection about, maybe it's not only because of the pandemic in the future. Maybe I should be a little bit more aware of people's body. So there might be a change in how other bodies are perceived that I think is quite interesting. Then there was a lot about losing control, which is also the case when we come to the American network in a second. But actually, in another way, this is about losing control of in a way that you are not being included in anything. So there was a lot of discussions about not being part of, for example, the political system, and not being heard and being left behind. That was really dominating as well. And then the elite also was something that scares people a lot. Apparently, not only the political elite, but also the economical elite, maybe also the intellectual elite. So some kind of diversion in the society was also dominating. And then the last thing was just dark nights, which I think is an old evergreen. But that was very much related to discussions about how women can walk around during nights, and that is still apparently very scary. Then comparing this to America, which is, I think, very interesting. So in Spain, you were afraid of the rest of the world coming to Spain and polluting everything that's great here. That's not the case in America. They were just really scared of the neighbor. So a lot of, white and black people living together, and distrust between somebody you live very close to, that's much more concerning. They didn't talk so much about the rest of the world, but somebody they're very close to. Then the pandemic, of course, also had a dominating role here in this network, but where this led into a discussion about the body in Spain, this led into a discussion about, can I trust information? So that's what sparked out of the pandemic here. We call it the scandemic, because there was a lot of discussion about this is just one step further into a world where you can't trust anything. Then, as I said, losing control was also dominating in America, but in another way than in Spain, where in Spain it was about fear of being excluded. Here it's about it's about being restricted, so not reaching out for your dream, which I think is a very American way of thinking about your life as well. So that makes sense in a way. Then there was a lot of concern about young people and anxiety and anxiety. What's it called? Pandemic almost, with young people being mentally ill. That concerned Americans a lot as well. And then, of course, not surprising, guns and drugs, which I think is also interesting that we didn't see here in Spain. So what can you use all this stuff for? Probably a lot that I can think of, because I'm not a director or a writer or anything. If you have a gun as a prop, or can you actually make an elite character more scary than a gun? I think that's an interesting challenge. In a way, if maybe we are not scared of guns so much, than in America, that has a tendency to put a gun into every scene, basically. I think also this talk about a distant enemy or a very close one is also quite interesting. You have apparently a tendency to be afraid of something that is a bit more distant than your neighbor, so maybe think about that. I think also this part about losing control in two different ways is quite interesting to understand if you're really more scared of being left out rather than locked in, which I think is an interesting question as well, and I don't have any answers to this, and there are no answers. That's the point with delivering into a creative process. Then I think also the part about bodies are quite interesting. Are they actually more scary than they are attractive? So I think that's also an interesting perspective. But we're not creating a movie today, so let's just go on. What scares film professionals the most? Because data and film is scary to many. I understand that, and I've heard that a lot. But I actually don't think it needs to be so scary. It depends a lot about how you design the flow, I guess. So a few things that we have learned over the first year here of working with Publicum. and things I said strongly believe in right now, because I'm sure there are so many new ways to work with data that we haven't found yet. So in a year, there might be something I strongly believe in that is not up there or is completely against this. But I think one thing that is just at least very important is to work with this not as evaluating stories, but more elevating intentions, to make sure that the creative people are in the center and the story is not left alone with a machine at any time, or a robot that tells you this is good or this is not good. A robot needs to be assistant and help you, but the writer and the people needs to be in control. And then, I don't know if I clicked too far there. No. So never leave the story alone with a computer. I think that's a question about which type of data you're using. So far, I think we have been fairly successful with working with no script data, but only with data about what people are talking about. And then I think also beware of early predictions is also a thing that I quite believe in right now. I of course see the value of script forecasting in terms of investment and production funding and so on, but I think it's also difficult to understand if this is actually providing the answers that we're hoping for and giving you a solid ground under the feet, because again, thinking about the world from 2 years ago where some stories were very successful, is that relevant today where so many different things has happened? Things are just moving so fast that I'm not sure how well we can rely on the predictions. But again, things are changing very differently. Also, prediction technology, so that might change very quickly. But that's at least what we have gathered from input from the first year. And I guess that's more or less it for now. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, so we are a little bit short of time, but we have time for some questions. I have lots of them, but I would like to leave it to you. So who's first?
No questions, come on.
You will be forcing me to...
You go ahead. You have some questions,
Okay.
Tony. Go ahead.
They're too scared.
I was scared of no questions at all. So, wow. I was thinking a lot of different things. I couldn't help thinking, for example, in a movie called The Platform. I don't know if you know a Netflix Spanish movie with TIC. It was directly addressing the question, what scares us the most in pandemic times, but it was a success worldwide. Or even Squid Game, which is a very popular TV series that asks this kind of question. So. Does it surprise you, for example, now that you're expanding, you are being focused on Denmark, Scandinavian countries, but for example, looking at what scares Spanish people, did it surprise you from your point of view of your work with Publicum?
Yes and no, because I get surprised every time, also when we do research in our own region. So the example I showed with the narcissist also surprised me a lot, even though it's within my own country. So I think you get surprised every time you just listen to what people are actually talking about. And this is also based on the volume of conversation and how far they reach. So we're not only just looking at the qualitative part of it, it's also a quantitative part. So we can also measure this is actually what people are talking about without ever telling it loudly. Mm-hmm. So I think you can also be very surprised in your own country and your own culture. Some yes and no. It was surprising, but I think it's surprising every time, basically.
Okay. And in your scheme, so you go first with the data at the early stage of the project, then the ethnography work. Have you thought about following up what happens after the film is released, coming back to ask people how they feel about what they have already seen?
As I said, I think the technology is moving so fast, so that is very interesting. We now work in the very early stage, So there's going to be a few years before we have the opportunity to ask that question. But I think that will be very interesting because one thing I think still we can learn from is to build a feedback loop that is making sense here, and it's not only based on what's sold well, but also more qualitative opinions. So I think that will be interesting. I don't have a model for it, but I think that will be very interesting.
Hi, maybe this is like really obvious question, but I was wondering, like, is there a real correlation? Like, you have all this data, and do you think that movies that reply to these worries or that have these same opinions that you search for work better? Or like, is there like always this direct correlation, or could it be that a movie that makes the opposite also raises this attention? Like, I wonder if we actually have to apply all these things always, or if there is a way, you know what I mean? Like, do you gather this data also? And
there's not one answer to what will work the best. I think what works the best is what the creative can use, to put it simply. So we're not trying to replace research today as it's done in the creative phase with this. This is an add-on, basically. So I think people should, of course, continue to research the characters and stories as they do right now. But this is dragging real interest from the audience into the project and translating it into creative fuel. But it is not more than that, to be honest, and that's what I wanted to stop it where. I want to stop it at that level as a creative fuel, not a guideline they have to follow. But if we can come to that level where creative people think audience is actually quite interesting and inspiring, if I think of them, I think the likelihood of reaching them is also bigger. But it shouldn't then be dominated. It shouldn't dominate what they do already. It should work together with it. And they can select, of course, what they think is most interesting to work with, of course, 100%.
Thank you for this inspiring project that you shared with us. What are the reception of the creatives, in a sense that they would love, like, if you have any feedback, how they apply this data in their creative work? They mostly prefer to put more provocative, against data, or put more the data to more provocative stuff.
It's again related to which decision to take, if it's always about creating identification or if you can also work with something else. That's the question, right? Yeah. But absolutely, it's that's not up to us. In this case, they rewrote some of the stuff. So they want to create more provocation in this case. So they chose another path of what you would experience or would expect, and made the characters do something that is out of character normally, to create more drama or to make people think this is really weird. And again, that case was a body horror thing, so that makes sense also to go up against what people would normally do in a cultural setting. So absolutely, and then we also have the opportunity to test some of that, of course, when we have the mobile anthropology part. So you can have 2 dates, for instance, where you would test the direction of what's the reaction we create if we go with this, or what's the opposite if we go against it. We can test that.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, from a sort of filmmaker's point of view, sort of how you can use this. Is it something that you work with you from the very beginning through to the end of the script? Because I'm just thinking, like, when you're writing something, you may have sort of 3 directions you could go down, and at that point you may ask for data to find out what is the strongest of those 3 decisions that you might make about that character, or about, especially things like not just actors, but characters themselves, whether they should be female, male, whether audiences would prefer something completely out of the blue rather than something that's more common, but then also playing with archetypes as well, because I don't think you should just flip things for the sake of it. They have to have some sort of connection to the story. So I just trying to work out how I could use you as a filmmaker to its maximum potential.
We have, of course, more opportunities to work with curiosity like this when we go into the mobile anthropology phase, because then we design every question exactly as the filmmaker have the curiosity. So often we do test a scene where we have, for instance, 2 different characters, and then we have a lot of questions about the decisions they took. What would you have done? How would you else imagine their life as a person if they take this and this decision, for instance? So we have a lot of input that we tailor-made questions for each of the character or the scenes. We often also work with testing the different pitches. So as you said, you maybe have 3 different versions the story can go. A normal thing for us to do on the first day before they know which movie it is to actually, on the first day, say, hello, welcome to this research. We now test you for 3 different stories, and you have to pick the one you think is most interesting. It's what they don't know is it's for the same film. And then they just pick, okay, I think this is quite interesting. So we have a very open-end interest there, and then we can start interviewing about why they chose exactly that direction.
Okay. So thank you first of all. So I was wondering for your chosen emotions, so for the pool, like now we had the focus on fear, how do you address to those clusters in the emotions? Yeah, thank you.
I use this one as an example. We don't have just one word normally. We will have, that's actually quite a work to understand which type of words people are using for a phenomenon. So that's what we type in to get the data out. So there will normally be maybe 10 to 15 different words, which there were also in this case behind the data that I showed you. We had I had a Spanish assistant helping me design a search string of 10 to 15 words where we said, okay, if a news reporter are talking about this theme, which kind of words will they use? But if people on Twitter are expressing the same feelings, they're probably using other words, but what are they? So that's a phase we go through. That's a research phase in itself to design the search strings, basically.
Es que si han hecho el experimento de hacer una peli desde cero solo por la compañía, por saber qué tal funciona el hacer una peli de inteligencia artificial. No desde una productora o un creador que quiere saber si su peli funciona, sino ellos como compañía decir, vamos a desarrollar una peli.
Ah, okay.
Por favor, dilo.
Yeah. If you have tested your methodology with an in-house production or project, or have you always worked with external companies?
No, but I would like to do that. I think that's interesting. But we always start with something that exists already, either a treatment or the first version of a script or somebody who has an intention of telling some kind of a story. But I think you could easily do that if you... I think that's also what the big streaming services are doing. They have some themes they want to have consecrated around, and I think you can absolutely do it with this, but we haven't done it. But I think that's on my to-do list for coming up. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think time's up. So thank you, Niels. I think it's great research. It's a great project, great presentation. Thank you. Great conversation too. Thank you very much. I hope to see some of you this afternoon at 5.